Hey everybody, this has been a hard video to make because it's about something very sad and tragic. So for a long time now, I've been wanting to make a video about hyperpop, the new subgenre of progressive, abrasive pop music that's been on the fringes of mainstream music, but slowly and surely is making its way into top 40 pop territory. I really didn't know what I was going to bring to the conversation that was new, so I put off making the video. There's so many resources about hyperpop here on YouTube, and I'll link to a few of them below in the description. Two of my favorites off the top of my head are the Mike the Snare video about hyperpop, and of course the Spotify playlist. As hyperpop has evolved, it's become harder and harder to define it, to fully explain it, but I think a great place to start is with the pioneers of the sound that really started to shape it right around the mid-2010s. I'm talking about people like PC Music, Charlie XCX, and of course, Sophie, who recently tragically died at the age of 34. So in light of this, instead of making a general video about hyperpop and what I think of it or my favorite hyperpop songs, I might make a video like that in the future, but today I wanted to focus on the legacy of Sophie. The first time you hear Sophie's music, if you haven't before, you're going to have a very visceral reaction to it. Obviously, you're either going to love it or hate it. You'll either have it on repeat for months or you'll vow to never listen to it again. But one thing is for sure, one thing you'll agree with me on is that you've never heard anything like it. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of Sophie and the music the artist created. I remember the first time I stumbled upon Sophie's songs Bip and Lemonade, and the collaboration with PC Music, Hey Cutie, released under the moniker QT. I remember watching Sophie's DJ set at Fun 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 Fest back in 2014. Back then, Sophie was anonymous. I saw only a silhouette in the shadows behind the DJ decks at that show. But that music, as it still does, had so much personality. You didn't really need a commanding presence in front of it. In 2017, with the video It's Okay to Cry, that all changed. We got to see Sophie in the spotlight for the first time, and we also got to hear that voice. The album that follows, Oil of Every Pearl's on Insides, is a seminal work. It's one of the essential listens for the subgenre of hyperpop and easily one of my favorite albums of the past decade. It sounded like it was from a distant future, which of course was exactly the point. For Sophie, that was always the point. Sophie was never much concerned with how the music was perceived in the present day because Sophie was always focused, maybe fixated, on sounds from the future. Listening to Sophie's interviews, you can get a sense the artist knew exactly where the sound should go, what Sophie envisioned for popular music in the future, that pop is by nature more experimental than we usually hear, and Sophie saw a place in that movement as leading the charge. Sophie believed only real change in culture and the world happened when we exposed experimental and radical ideas to a mass public. That was why Sophie wasn't afraid to call the genre of music she was making advertising. It's why Sophie wasn't apprehensive about placing that music in advertising campaigns. Lemonade, lemonade. Sophie talked a lot about what was currently available to produce music was limiting. That computer software was to become a new frontier, not only to create music, but develop Sophie's own sounds, things the human ear had never heard before, something our imagination could previously only envision. Computers could make those sounds real.
I try to imagine a hyper-real world of sounds that we're sometimes used to from blockbuster films and that kind of thing. Sounds which cartoonize and exaggerate naturally occurring or organic sounds and phenomena and materials that don't exist at the moment. An example would be that there's like a piano that's mountain size high, and imagining what the sound of that piano would be if the string was that large.
One quote that Sophie gave to Electronauts, which I found in a recent article from The Atlantic about computers replicating sounds of existing instruments, is a good example of the artist's philosophy. To put it mildly, Sophie found the practice ridiculous. The language of electronic music shouldn't still be referencing obsolete instruments like kick drum or clap. No one's kicking or clapping. They don't have to. Instead, Sophie used equipment that worked like, quote, a sculpture machine, treating sound waves as clay, quote, not like a computer pretending to be a band from the 70s or whatever. Today, some of Hyperpop's sounds are so busy. They're filled with beats and sounds and auto-tune clipped vocals. It's intentionally in your face. Just listen to something like 100 gecs and you'll see what I mean. I'm not saying it's bad, it's just different. Sophie's arrangements were more sparse and simpler without losing the punch that you expect from Hyperpop. Sophie did a lot with just a few elements. Another thing a lot of today's hyperpop is intentionally abrasive, and certainly Sophie's music has been characterized by that as well, but Sophie was always different. The music helped you escape, maybe even to a different planet or a different world, somewhere you felt you belonged. It should be no surprise that Sophie's fans now are petitioning for NASA to name a planet after the artist. Sophie's music was hopeful and therapeutic, even if it was loud and unconventional. I so wish I could give you more examples here and share more songs with you from Sophie's catalog here in the video, but you'll have to seek them out yourself because YouTube. I definitely invite you to go down that rabbit hole independently. One song in particular I do want to talk about, however, is It's Okay to Cry. Initially, when it came out, I didn't really like it. Typically, I gravitated toward the dancier stuff like Bip, Lemonade, Hey QT, Ponyboy, Immaterial, but lately I've been listening a lot to It's Okay to Cry. And to say it hits different now after Sophie's death is an understatement. I feel like I really missed something the first time around. It's just a great example of Sophie trying something brand new, completely vulnerable, completely genuine, 100% confident, and at the same time welcoming you into this whole new world. For anyone that was paying attention, it was clear that the music Sophie was making was the sound of tomorrow. And of course, the most forward-thinking people sought Sophie out for collaborations. People like Vince Staples, Madonna, and of course, Charli XCX. When no one knew exactly who Sophie was, there was a lot of speculation about the artist's identity and gender. But in the later years, once we had a face behind the sounds, the conversation turned to the queer and trans signifiers in Sophie's music. Much like the sounds Sophie created, the central idea with identity was that there were no traditional or preconceived boundaries. Pitchfork puts it really well in their recent piece about Sophie. Transness was an essential part of Sophie's Futurism. It was a way of reconciling all manner of binaries, not just male and female, but also being and becoming, questions and answers, artifice and authenticity, in the pursuit of a more perfect world. And as Sophie put it in an interview with Paper, for me, transness is taking control to bring your body more in line with your soul and spirit, so the two aren't fighting against each other and struggling to survive. Alongside the sounds created, Sophie's focus was towards the future, and that included the acceptance of oneself and others, and the limitless possibilities of how one can see themselves and who they can become. That's an uplifting message to give to people, especially young people and people that have been marginalized. I'll share another quote from Sophie about this. This one is from an interview with DIYMag. It is so important for queer people and for anyone making music that's deemed to be somehow alternative or inaccessible. They shouldn't be made to feel like their identities are not mainstream or to be marginalized just through genre and categories. I think it's really important to break down those binaries and not feel that because you're making weird music that you're a weird person. To create those bridges is possible. It's one of the most important things for artists to do. So why did I title the video this? Why is Sophie an icon? Well, that's easy, because icons shape the world. More than just forward-thinking music, Sophie made you rethink what you thought music could be, what it could sound like, and that music could actually have the potential to reach a huge audience. Through hyperpop, the LGBTQ community, and increasingly the mainstream pop world, Sophie helped shape the future. It's a future we haven't even seen yet. And sadly, it's one Sophie didn't get to see. It's equally as tragic to know that Sophie was just getting started. I've talked a lot on this channel about my favorite album of 2020, Charli XCX's How I'm Feeling Now. It too is a futuristic hyperpop record made in a quarantine during a global pandemic, and I've spoken about how I think this sound from the album will become the new pop music. That works like these will be seen as iconic and ahead of their time. That by the time the 2020s are over, 100 gecs, Charlie XCX, and artists like that will be seen as pioneers, as icons of futuristic pop. I would like to say you can add Sophie to that list, but let's be real. Sophie was already on it. Sophie's been on it. The list exists because of Sophie, and it will continue to grow because of Sophie. But Sophie will remain at the very top. You can read more about Sophie at the links in the description below, and thank you for watching.